Germany and Ukraine are banding together to try and put more pressure on the Russian side to have a negotiated settlement that is to their advantage, to their liking. Yeah, not a lot of chance of that happening. And this just continues on with the theater of the bizarre that we've seen for, golly, I mean, most of this war. I mean, we got to say, and certainly since Trump has been elected, the two sides on the West, the Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine and Europe on one hand, and Trump on the other, all together on the Western side, just continues to be chaotic and unclear on even what its objectives are going to be. And you see this dynamic, and we'll look at the Russian side of this in just a minute. And by the way, let me just point out, Patrick Bob is supposed to be on. We're having some problems getting the connection made. As soon as he is able to, we'll have him join us. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that, since that's what we've been promoting, that he's going to be joining us. And we really hope we can get these things straightened out, because he has some terrific insights that we can only get from him. And so hopefully he'll be able to join us soon. But in the meantime, we want to keep bring you up to date on what we do have. And let's look, but before we even get to the German part here in the Ukraine, let's get to the U.S. side of that dysfunctional relationship. And we've talked many times about how Trump talked about how he would get this resolved before he even took office. Then it turned into 100 days. And then in April, it was like, all right, we are days away from walking if we don't get the deal. And then April 29th, it was another days away. And then in May 4th, it was, well, maybe Russia's tapping me along, but we'll see. But we're not going to keep going on forever. And then the State Department said, we're out of the negotiating business. We're not going to do any mediating business. We're not going to jump from city to city. And then we started jumping to cities, and we went to Istanbul, etc. Well, now there's been a new one. Yesterday in the Oval Office, President Trump was again asked of the issue about the Russia-Ukraine war, and is there a timeline?
Do you still believe that Putin actually wants to end the war?
I can't tell you that, but I'll let you know in about 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, we're going to find out very soon. We're going to find out whether or not he's tapping us along or not. And if he is, we'll respond a little bit differently, but it'll take about a week and a half, 2 weeks.
He wants to find out, does Russia really want to end the war? Does he really want a negotiated settlement? And listen, folks, this is not hard. You don't need to wait 2 more weeks to find out. Russia has been unequivocal. They have been emphatic. They keep saying almost every day there's some new statement coming out of one of the senior officials from the Russian side, from Vladimir Putin on down. They keep telling us exactly what their conditions are. It's not hard to figure out. Yes, they want a negotiated settlement. Yes, they're willing to talk. Russia has been talking negotiated settlement from before the war, years before the war, right before the war, and every phase throughout it. They have continued to say, let's have a negotiated settlement. Here are the terms. As I've been pointing out to you, and even before this channel existed, I was writing and going on American television stations saying, every time you get rid of one of these opportunities to end the war, every time you bypass a diplomatic off-ramp, the conditions get worse the next time that there is an exit. And we are seeing that play out dramatically. We've shown you many examples here recently where even the Russians are saying, it's not my interpretation, this is the last chance for peace. We showed you, I think a week or so ago, where Dmitry Medvedev point blank said that. This is the last chance for peace. And so Putin is continuing to say, yes, we're still willing to talk. We haven't passed that yet, but here's some pretty significant discussions. Well, we now know that the next meeting is going to be between the two parties, Ukraine and Russia, is going to be on this coming Monday, June the 2nd. And as we've been talking from the previous meeting that they have, both sides are preparing a memorandum that's going to say, all right, here's our view of where it is. So it's basically, here's our entry point, here's our start point. And look, folks, I mean, neither one of them have been made public, but it's not hard to figure out what's on both of them, because the Zelensky and his side and the European folks who are behind him and the Russians and their allies and their officials, everybody has been voicing what their side is saying. And there's no mystery to it. So I'm not sure what Trump is talking about in 2 weeks, what he thinks is going to happen in 2 weeks. If he wants to know if Russia's tapping him along, Russia's not tapping anybody along. They're just very frankly saying, here's our position. Either meet this negotiations, or as Medvedev also gave the word to, we'll just keep fighting. As we saw Ambassador Polyansky on our channel, if we don't get this deal, we'll just keep fighting. Not a mystery, folks. Not a surprise. Nothing you need to wait to find out what it is. They already say the Russians haven't changed their position from all throughout this whole 4-year madness, and they're not going to change it in 2 weeks. So if what they're saying now is something you won't be happy with in 2 weeks, then there's your answer. You're going to know what they're saying. If you consider that tapping along, then you're being tapped along. It's odd. I see a lot of commentary here of late, repeated over and over in the Western side, that Russia's just playing for time. They're not serious about negotiations. They don't actually want to negotiate a settlement. They're just playing for time. It's funny. Those people don't actually say playing for time to do what? What is it you think that they're stalling for? Because the implications being that they're trying to wordsmith to shame Putin into saying, okay, all right, I guess I'll come to the table and be serious now. But the point being that Russia isn't changing their position. They're not moderating what they're asking for because they don't have to. They don't need to concede to what you want. They don't have to be give and taken here in a genuine, a general negotiation. Both sides have to give and take if you want to have a good outcome, but that implies that both sides are something near parity so that they have to give. Well, like say the Korean War, the negotiations between the North Koreans and the Chinese on one side and the Combined Forces Command in the United States led by on the other side, both sides were in general military parity. Neither side could effect a victory over the other, so they had to give and take. And that's why those negotiations took so long. I think it was like 1.5 years from start to finish before they got to even to the armistice. Of course, they never had a peace treaty. That part proved to be too hard. This is not like that. This is a situation where one side is demonstrably in the dominant position. They can win the war. You've had General Kellogg say a lot lately. You've seen Secretary of State Rubio mention lately. This does not have a military solution. It does have a military solution. There is a path for one side of this dynamic to achieve a military victory. It can work on the battlefield for one side. And obviously that's the Russian side. So we need to get our definitions right here, and we need to be clear on what we're even looking for. But the next question is about, let's go ahead and get into the German side here, because now the new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has been making some curious statements here of late. Some of them I think are very good and show a lot of courage, and some of them show something less than I don't know if courage is the right word. It's not wise, I think. And the fact that they're both coming from the same guy is, to me, a little bit puzzling. I don't know a lot about Friedrich Merz, and maybe with more knowledge we can, and certainly, hopefully, we get Patrick Bob on very soon to be able to give us some of those insights. But let's go ahead and just show you what they are saying and what the problems are. So here is Friedrich Merz here a couple of days ago, talking about how he has now taken off the range restrictions on the weapons that Ukraine can use to fire into Russia.
There are no longer any range restrictions on weapons supplied to Ukraine, neither by the British, nor by the French, nor by us, nor by the Americans. This means that Ukraine can now defend itself, for example, by attacking military positions inside Russia. It couldn't do that until a while ago. With very few exceptions, it didn't do that until a while ago either. Now it can.
In announcing this, the German side has also said that they are going to help Ukraine with some domestic production of, quote, their own long-range missiles, which apparently is basically the German version that's helped to be put together by the Ukraine side. It's paper thin excuse. Basically, it's the Taurus missile, the long-range missile that they're going to try and produce within Ukraine. I have great doubts that that's anything that's going to come to materialize, because it takes a long time to set up something that's highly sophisticated like that, to outsource the production of it and the building of it. And number one, where are you going to do it? Russia has been attacking sites all throughout the country really for a couple of years now, but in the last number of months, they've been doing with an increasing effectiveness because there's lots of partisans on the ground throughout Ukraine. There's actually pro-Russian sentiment that people are throughout the Ukraine side has been providing targeting data. Of course, Russia also has long-range drones. They have high-altitude drones. They have satellites of their own. So all these different sources, they're getting better and better at identifying where the Ukrainian central nodes are And then they're attacking those with drones and missiles, which can penetrate the Ukraine air defense system. So I don't know where you think you're going to build a factory that's big enough to be able to produce that with the sophistication and the technology that's necessary, even for the machinery to put it together, the expertise and personnel, and that's no one's going to figure out where that is and probably take it out before it even gets built. Leaving that aside, though, there was a press conference between Merz and Zelensky, and I don't remember if this was early today or yesterday afternoon. I didn't see the date on it, actually. I guess Gary's showing it right there. I can't actually see the date. But they were met there.
Yeah, it was yesterday, Danny.
It was yesterday. All right, thanks, Gary. So in this press conference, we haven't gotten it translated yet. We're going to try for later on today. But Merz was saying things like that this is these drone attacks by the Russian side shows that they don't want a peace. And we're talking about over the last number of days. He said that this just shows that the Russian side is not actually looking for peace. And this barrages are a slap in the face to those seeking peace on the Western side. And that was actually mirrored in a tweet by Zelensky, or an X post, sorry, behind the scenes a little bit here, where he says, this is 2 days ago, Zelensky writes, over 900 attack drones launched against Ukraine in just the last 3 days, along with ballistic and cruise missiles. There is no military logic in this, but it is a clear political choice of Russia, the choice to keep waging war. And he goes on from there. But listen, it's one thing for Zelensky to be selective in what he points out. It's another thing for us in the West, or really anybody in the world, to participate in what he's doing right there. Because, and I've seen it on many different platforms. Everybody in the West that I've seen, and so far it's everybody, may have been one exception, only talk about the Russian attacks into Kiev, into Odessa, and into Sumy, and several other places throughout the depth and broad breadth and width of their country. They're kind of silent on the fact that there have been almost an equal amount of Ukrainian drones going north. Gary showed you yesterday some of the clips of the drones that were the Ukraine drones that were striking in Russia, on Russian territory. Russia is responding. And listen, neither side can point a finger at either one of them. It's a war. No one has stopped anything. And this idea, yeah, thanks, there it is, Gary. So this is what Zelensky doesn't mention. This is what Merz doesn't mention. And it's got to be intentional deception. He's not stupid. He's not unaware of what's happening. Merz is not. So for him to go on this public statement that he knows all of his friendly media are going to cover and just says that this is a barbaric thing, this proves that the Russians don't want peace. Well, by extension of the obvious logic, if that proves that the Russians don't want peace, then the fires that are going from south to north also indicates that Ukraine doesn't want peace. It can't be one way and the other. It's got to be either all the way on this side. This logic has to prevail on both, or this logic has to prevail on both. And if it's just a war and nobody has declared any ceasefire, then where is the even concept to say, look at those guys, those bad people over there, they're firing rocks while they're talking, when that's exactly what the Russians said. They said, we will talk without conditions, without preconditions or anything else. We'll meet any place. We're not going to stop fighting. We're not going to engage in a ceasefire. We'll consider one if these very stringent conditions are applied. And if they're not, we'll simply keep fighting. No one can be surprised by the fact that this was what the Russians are doing. If you want the Russians to stop, then you have to say, all right, what were those conditions again? And then see if you can meet them. If you can, apparently Russia would consider it, but they're draconian. So don't be under any illusions. It would be really, really harsh. But if you're not willing to do that, then by definition, you are ready to continue receiving these salvos. And there's no evidence that Russia is going to stop anytime soon, because those things are starting to work. There's just as many of those, if not more so, getting through. And then listen, you got to pay attention to those videos you see there. Those aren't military targets. It's not a Russian base. That's just cities. That's just inside some of the outskirts of Moscow. They're just hitting buildings you see there. And it's ironic because those are the same things they accuse the Russians of doing, attacking civilian targets, etc. And you see, those aren't, sometimes you see it happen where the air defense missiles miss their target and then they land in a city or so. That happens on both sides periodically. This is not that. This is the drones went to their targets, which were apartment buildings, residential areas like you see on the screen right there. Not an accident, not a mistake. Now, again, you can pass that off to your side. You can tell all of your friendly media outlets in the West that Russia's this evil monster, and then you can show the images of the destroyed Ukraine cities, which they do on a regular basis, and then you can just turn a blind eye to this stuff. And for the Western audiences, like Merz intends, all they're going to hear is what's going on with the Ukraine side, and that they'll see Russia as the monster, which is the intent. And that works on public relations. It does work. We see it. We've seen it in the European Union, UK in particular. They're very strong on that because only one side of the message gets out. What it doesn't do is change the dynamic on the ground. And so whether Ukraine produces their own long-range missiles, whether they get them from Germany, from France, from Great Britain, or the United States, those missiles are still going to be fired from there into Russia. And as I've been telling you guys forever, they have no military significance. They are not going to change the war in here. And if you need any proof of that, just look at the Russian side. They have been firing hundreds of, sometimes salvos of hundreds of missiles, long-range missiles, throughout the course of the war, all throughout the Ukrainian country, all the way to the border, all the way to the western border. And everywhere in between, it is a routine and relentless things, especially the last 2 years. Totally, they've been destroying the energy infrastructure, command and control centers, homes, depots, the factories that make a lot of the weapons, etc., fuel, ammunition depots, all of those kinds of things. And it hasn't knocked Ukraine out of the war. They continue to fight. They continue to put up stiff resistance. And those are now in the thousands, many, many thousands in just the last 2 years, on top of the tens of thousands of drones that continue to fly inside there. Now, if that has not knocked out the weaker party, by what rationale and logic do you suggest that this is going to somehow bring Russia to its knees? That's what Merz was saying, that we want these missiles to go in there to force Russia into a negotiated settlement, which, by the way, this negotiated settlement means we're not going to give up anything. So it is as detached from reality as it can possibly be. And if we thought Chancellor Scholz before was detached, in some ways, Chancellor Merz is even more so, at least on this issue here. But that's just where we are. Now, the Russians are not silent on this. And as I said, everything matters about what's on the ground. You can pretend that only one side is this evil guy, etc., but it doesn't change the facts on the ground. Russia recognizes that. Here is Dmitry Peskov being asked about Chancellor Merz's comments.
Мерц уже не только в очередной раз подтверждает, что у Украины нет больше никаких ограничений по дальнобойным орудиям. Он на пресс-конференции с Зеленским заявил о финансировании Германией производства дальнобойных ракет на Украине для того, чтобы она могла применять эти ракеты дальнобойные там, где она считает нужным, в том числе за пределами своей территории.
В данном случае мы видим, как Германия соревнуется с Францией в первенстве по дальнейшему провоцированию войны. Все эти действия, естественно, мешают мирным усилиям. Мы надеемся, что, несмотря на такие провокационные действия и на все препятствия, все-таки удастся продолжить процесс урегулирования, удастся провести второй тур переговоров, обменяться меморандумами, проектами меморандумов, о которых условились. Иначе охарактеризовать вот эти действия Германии невозможно, к сожалению.
Мерц уже не только...
Sorry, you can see Peskov there has been very diplomatic, as he always is, and is not given to a lot of excitable prose, shall we say, and throwing threats. He's still saying, well, look, we still want the peaceful process to continue going on here. We have this meeting that's coming up here. We're going to exchange memorandums. But these kinds of things, all they do is undermine that, because these provocations are continuing on. And listen, this shows, unlike the caricature that we have of Russia, that even though they're getting these provocations, they're still pursuing the diplomatic track. They are still leaving open the possibility of an ugly negotiated settlement here, or they're going to keep fighting here. And there was some that were far less diplomatic in their response from the Russian side, as one of the senior leaders of the Russian Duma, their parliament, came out and said, hey, if Germany does this, we will strike back on Germany, and maybe not just on the launch points, but on the country of origin. And there have been many in the Russian side that says, hey, it's about time to just call this what it is. This is the direct participation of any of these countries that fire these missiles. We'll know what they are. We're going to fire those. There's some commentary today out of Germany that Merz apparently today has said, well, we're just going to not say what we're giving Ukraine anymore. We're not going to talk about it, as though that somehow that you just not saying the word Taurus missile and all of a sudden one lands somewhere deep in Russia, that's going to be, that you can hide behind those words. I mean, it's childish, it's infantile, and it's absurd and potentially deadly in its consequences. Because we keep thinking, and clearly he said this, because I don't know if it's true or not for sure, because I haven't heard any commentary from the U.S. one way or the other. But he did say the United States was specifically one of those that also is removing any range restrictions inside the use with the use of RV or long-range missiles inside of Russia. And so that means that U.S., France, Germany, and the U.K. are all saying our long-range missiles can fire into there. Now, I think, as I've mentioned, there's not that many of them. So even if you fired them all, Russian air defense capability, Russian electronic warfare jamming capacities will knock a majority of them off target. They've been used for a long time to no real effect, to no even operational effect, much less tactical effect on the front lines. And therein is the problem. Why do you want to risk something that could, maybe Russia will act one day and they will attack something outside of Ukraine, when you know that if everything was, just all things being equal, that these things aren't going to make any difference, even whatever gets through. And I'm sure some would get through. The Russia's air defense isn't impervious. It's very good, but it's not perfect. So that means some things would get through. Now, so far, Russia hasn't done anything. They issued these warnings the first time when Biden mentioned that he was removing restrictions on long-range weapons after he lost the election and before Trump took over. And there was a few that were tried. There was a couple that allegedly hit. Most were knocked down. And Russia didn't do anything tangible in response. They didn't escalate it. But we are playing a dangerous game when we keep saying, well, because Russia hasn't done anything so far, they never will, so we can just keep doing this stuff. And I don't know why you even want to risk that, because it's not going to change the outcome for your side. It's not going to improve anything. It's not going to make the Russians force them into anything, because they don't have to. It's self-evident that we don't need to. And I just don't understand why we keep playing with this. It's as though some actually want this to be expanded. It's like some in Europe actually hope that Russia, this Duma leader, makes good on that threat, and that they actually do fire across the border of Ukraine and hit something on NATO territory. It's almost like some would be gleeful if they get to say, yay, Article 5, we get to impose it, and now here we go, here's a big war. Why would any rational person do that? And I know some people say, well, it's about money, and they can, okay, money's not going to do any good if you're in a damn grave. If people keep dying, especially some of these people who allegedly would benefit from it, if you get into a general war with Russia, folks, nobody wins in that case. I mean, the chances of it going nuclear are just through the roof. Nobody better fight one of those wars. And why are we playing around the edges of it? It is irrational and immoral as it can be, because you're risking the lives of potentially millions of people who are presently at peace in Europe right now. We don't need to put other people's lives at risk by taking these absurd kind of situations here. Now, Peskov mentioned a minute ago these memorandums that were going to be written, and these upcoming peace talks will now then the next date has been firmed up by the Russian side, and Sergei Lavrov announced that today.
Тогда же в Стамбуле было условлено о том, что Москва и Киев подготовят документы, излагающие позицию каждой из сторон для достижения устойчивого урегулирования. Российская сторона, как и договаривались, оперативно разработала соответствующий меморандум, который излагает нашу позицию по всем аспектам надежного преодоления первопричин кризиса. Наша делегация во главе с Владимиром Мединским готова представить этот меморандум делегации Украины и дать необходимые пояснения в ходе второго раунда возобновленных прямых переговоров в Стамбуле в ближайший понедельник, 2 июня.
So again, Russia says, even despite all these things that have happened, even despite the threats that Peskov mentioned a minute ago, they're still going down the diplomatic track. They're still planning on meeting on Monday. They're going to give this memorandum. We know the memorandum is going to be the ugly terms that we've talked about before. Won't be a surprise. I could probably write that memorandum and be pretty close to what turns out to be the case. So we're pretty clear what's going to happen on Monday. It's also clear, by the way, that the Ukraine side is also preparing its own memorandum. They will deliver that to the Russian side. I could probably write that one too. Not hard to do. All I got to do is look at Zelensky's Twitter feed, and I can probably pull it out of there. It'll be pretty easy. The two sides are going to be so far out there, not even in my visual screen here. They're so far apart. And so that almost certainly is going to lead to just a continuation of the offensive here. But one of the things that I want to address here in the last bit that we have before we end this episode is what is Russia's actual intent after that? Because it should be self-evident to everyone now that Ukraine, writ large, with all the support from the West, doesn't have the capacity to stop Russia. Whether that's fast, medium, or slow, the end is already decreed. So at some point, that's going to be a Ukraine defeat if they don't agree to any version of ugly terms that are being offered this coming Monday. What then does that mean for Russia? Well, now what people have been saying relentlessly, actually before this war started and certainly all the time since in the West, is that Russia and Putin specifically want to recreate the Soviet Union. They want the Russian Empire to reign again on the continent of Europe. Well, at an international peace conference in Moscow, I believe it was today, Vladimir Putin addressed what his version is of security in Europe.
I have said it many times and will repeat. We are convinced that the new security architecture must be equal and indivisible, meaning all states should receive firm guarantees of their own security, but not at the expense of the security and interests of other countries. It is important to make our continent a space of peace and stability, an example of sustainable economic, social, and cultural development.
Now, that doesn't sound very Hitlerian-like. Now, remember, Hitler was big on talking about Lebensraum and all these other kind of things, that they needed more space and they needed to help out their compatriots in all these other countries, et cetera. They had this big army that was built that could easily have legitimately put at risk the entire continent, because they had, I think, a couple million men under arms even early, turned into be many more than that as time went on. That's not the case here in Russia, because Russia is talking about they want a security architecture to replace whatever's going on now and what has been in effect since the end of World War II with something that has equal security and stability for everybody, where everybody can live at peace. And he mentioned several existing security architectures that he said that could be samples, and they're all things that exist now. I think it was the OSCE was one, and several others, where he's saying, look, there's plenty of things that we can use it to mirror off of. All the things that all the groups that he mentioned are things that are organizations that are designed to have peaceful coexistence, things that allow people to have security and to not threaten anybody else. And I think the OSCE itself is one of the things that's predicated on nobody's security can be obtained at the expense of someone else's security. He said all states have to have the ability to have security. Now, you can say, well, yeah, obviously that doesn't, you don't think that applies to Ukraine. And he would say, no, it doesn't, because of what the other 50 states that came against us did, because they were trying to secure Ukraine's security at the expense of ours and moving their NATO lines right up to our border in Ukraine, which we told everybody was a red line. So their claim is that once this gets established here, then that's where we want to say, let's now apply that equally, so that no one has to put us in that position again. That's his position. You don't have to agree with it. You can say it's not true or whatever. But again, as I always say, the ground is what matters. Does he talk about wanting to conquer other countries, or does he talk about wanting to live in security with other countries? We see where that is. Now, what about the capacity? Is he, like Hitler, building up this multi-million man army to have peace while he's getting ready to have this big army somewhere else? So far, the answer is no. They are bigger than they were. than they have been in the past, but their stated objective is to defend their country. They have never said that they wanted to go and take other countries because they want to take it. They have said that they don't want anyone else to attack them on their western border. That's what the Russian objective has always been, especially since 1991, after the Soviet Union dissolved and it became the Russian Federation. Since that time, they have not talked about conquered anyone else. They've been talking about national security and the defense of their frontiers and their borders. So their forces that they have now are bigger than they were in February 2022. And we also have to look at the context. That's in context of people like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, several other countries, the UK, for example. Germany is also, they keep saying we need to prepare for war. We need to get ready to fight. Obviously, there's only one person on the continent that they would fight, and that's Russia. The European Union itself is saying we have a rearm program, like a 10-year period, where we want to spend $800 billion on top of what's being spent right now. We need to upgrade everything. So that stuff doesn't happen in a void, folks, because it's this whole escalation ladder. One action by one side creates a counteraction by the other side. And then the other side sees this action. They say, well, we have to now ramp up more. This side sees that, and there's that, well, we're not going to be on the bottom end, and you see where this goes. This turns into an arms race, and in the current environment to where people seem have almost no limits on what they can do, and willingness to take all kinds of risk, as Chancellor Merz is doing right now, that should cause great concern for all of us. It is time to ratchet down the rhetoric and to ramp up diplomacy and find new ways to figure this out. Ramping up military ain't going to keep you safe, folks. That's going to just probably continue to light the fuse of a future conflict. It's going to be the classic self-fulfilling prophecy. It's happened many times in human history. We're on that path now. We need to cut this fuse and get it off the table now. One of the first things we can do is to get the Russia-Ukraine war off the table. It's finished, folks. Don't have any fantasies that by continuing on with more weapons, more ammunition, more joint production inside Ukraine, etc., that you can ever stop what's going to happen now. It's just not possible, mainly because of the manpower issue. Ukraine can never muster because they have catastrophically lost their manpower pool. There's so many that have been killed, they'll never be able to recover it in a generation or two. It'll take that long to be able to recover. Russia, on the other hand, is continuing to grow. Don't test that theory out. It's very close to being rock solid and irrefutable. But if we don't do what's wise and rational, then we're going to find out things happen that we don't like very much. That's not ordained. Nothing is ordained. We always have the chance to take off-ramps. We have rejected every off-ramp that's been offered so far. It is time to stop that insanity, cut this fuse before it gets any closer to exploding, and we need to start having more dialogue. We need to have more talks and anything besides building up military forces. We've got plenty to defend ourselves now. If Russia should blindly attack us tomorrow, there's a lot of combat power now that we can deal with that. But don't start continuing on this, going up the escalation ladder, because one day, all it takes, folks, is one missile to get through the Russian side to strike something of real meaning, and the patience on the Russian side can evaporate, and God only knows what could happen then. Let's don't find out. Let's use our sanity. Let's use the wisdom that does exist and start taking some courage. And if these leaders can't get it done, then we need to find other leaders who will and elevate them through the democratic process. Even if that's ugly and difficult and takes a lot of time, that's what we need to do for our own future and our own hope, so that everybody has a chance to live in prosperity and in peace. It's not off the table. It is possible. We'll see how that works out there. But thank you very much for joining us today. Sorry, Patrick Bob we weren't able to make that work out. We'll get him back on as soon as we can. But we do know that we have former CIA analyst Larry Johnson with us this afternoon at 2 o'clock. So a little over an hour from now. And we're going to talk specifically about this so-called 2-week deadline that Putin was just given by Trump in the Oval Office yesterday. And as always, Larry has a lot of great things to say. We'll see you then at 2 o'clock on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.